wanted over McCoy Tyner's album Trident.
That is true.
You were talking about it, and I was like, I'm familiar with that record, and I went in.
Basically, we met through mutual friends, I think, first.
Yeah.
And then we were in Wayne Wallace's big band together, and that's when we really started collaborating musically.
Yeah, that's what we were both like, oh, this other person can write, oh, this other person can play.
Wayne had us both writing for the band. Murasaki is actually a chart that I wrote, and we performed this, the big band, and he wrote a couple charts that were fantastic as well. And so that's how we got to know each other as composers, rather than just musicians and friends.
This project was actually Matt's idea originally. He approached me. Basically, the idea came to him after the officers who killed Michael Brown and Eric Garner were not indicted. And he said, what can I possibly do? And so he thought it would be a good idea for us to try to fill a niche that was not being filled in the jazz scene at the moment.
When I had the reaction to some of the things that were happening in the States, Hannah was the person I thought, Hannah should be the person helping me do this.
Because my big band compositions had already had a social justice bent to them.
Right.
And even though your compositions in the Way of the Walls band weren't necessarily social justice, you were interested in getting into that.
Right. And I knew that Hannah was like a strong composer and could play very, very well. Playing these instruments. So that made sense. We complement each other well.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, here's a whole bunch of ideas. And Hannah's like, why don't we learn how to execute those ideas one step at a time?
So can you talk a little bit about maybe the musical or spiritual predecessors to this effort? Which was what inspired you?
Charlie Hayden's Liberation Music Orchestra
is probably the most direct spiritual predecessor. Is Charlie Hayden's Liberation Music Orchestra. But there's a very, very long and rich tradition in jazz of socially provocative music. You've got Max Roach's Freedom Suite, you've got Lucas Fables of Faubus, you've got Duke Ellington writing Black Beauty in 1929. I mean, the first racially, first racial commentary song, Black and Blue, Andy Razaf, again, in the 1920s. Jazz has been a socially provocative music for a very, very long time, and that has kind of been lost recently.
Yeah, it's been provocative for longer than it hasn't. Mm-hmm. And so the shift back should be natural, I think.
And we don't want to go back in time. Again, we're bringing in all the musical things that have happened in the 20th and 21st centuries, looking forward, but just bringing jazz into that mix because it's so central in American music and so central in crafting American identity that we want it to be part of all, at least our socially provocative music looking towards the future.
With regards to the Latin percussion and the use of many different styles and genres on the album, we did that very intentionally because our goal for this project was to reintroduce jazz into the socially provocative music of this era. But we didn't want to do that in a way that left out all of the music that has happened in the United States since jazz's heyday. And so we thought it was imperative to include all of the music that has been touched by jazz or has come from jazz in this album about the 21st century. So it's about our tradition, it's about our heritage, but it's also about all the things that we've been through musically and socially since then.
I think that the reason that we were able to write so polystylistically is because we heard it like that. Like there's one reason why we should be doing this. There's a lot of ways we can express it, and there's a lot of ways we know how to.
My approach to compositions is just, I hear something in my head, and I write it down, and I flesh it out, and spin it out, But it's all just this kind of subconscious spilling out of the music that's inside of me. That's a very cliche thing to say, but that's kind of how I feel. That's my compositional process. Matt is the total opposite. His compositions are 100% math. They're these puzzles that he works together with different sets of rules and different formulas. It's all planned out. Everything has a rhyme and reason.
and it works logically, which was why I wanted to do most of all, was to make these rules cohabitate, make an overarching rule set that enable me to contain all these different techniques. And Hannah has similar devices through all that, but she hears it first. I think that's something super interesting, because that's not something I can do. Like, her story for writing Bismarck is something like, yeah, I sat down the Sunday before rehearsals and was like, okay, and pressed play on the tape recorder in my head and then just wrote it down. I'm like, that's magic. That's some witchcraft voodoo, and I don't know how to do that. And then I would show her like my score analysis, and she'd be like, yeah, that's some witchcraft voodoo, I don't know how to do that. So, but at the same time, we genuinely perceived it as all combining. I think because like the why of why we were writing was the same throughout.
We were a little bit worried that the compositions, because we have such different compositional styles, that it was going to sound like two different albums. But it really didn't. It sounds like a cohesive musical project. It was surprising and rewarding that our compositional styles work together. I think that the most important personal attribute in going forward in these types of projects is humility and being able to listen with an open heart. So I have to make decisions about how to go forward with this, but I always try to keep in mind that if someone came to me and said, hey, I think what you're doing is inappropriate or it's appropriation, I would try to receive that with as much of an open heart and with as much humility as possible. I think pride and ego are what gets in the way of it. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I think that's appropriation, and you immediately say, I'm not racist, I have black friends. Like, that's BS. Listen to them. Listen to their voice.
If you just played it down like it looked on the page, you wouldn't get the why. And in this group, especially, the why is super important. The why is everything,
Thing that they're doing that isn't relevant. Political protests going on, human rights in general, all of the riots that have been happening. So it's a pretty relevant record, and that's pretty cool.
It's it goes deeper than just the music. It's definitely kind of like the catch of the group. It's the music's kind of like a mirror to the political issues that are being discussed in the songs. To me, that's kind of what drew me to this project. When Hannah and Matt asked me to be a part of it, I really thought, it's a very cool concept.
Well, originally the plan was to have a much more diverse cast, right? Mostly because, we didn't want people who only had a certain set of experiences telling the story about pluralities of experiences.
We didn't want it to be homogenous in any direction.
Right. And so we had this original roster that was just hugely diverse and pretty representative of America as a cross section. And as the project wore on with the planning stages, it became more and more obvious that people couldn't make the gig. They have families, they have to be out of town, in other towns, things like that. So we went with people who would be able to just play the music very well, who maybe didn't represent America as a cross section of the band.
Yeah, because basically what happened is so saxophone section, we had in mind, I think it was a woman, an African American man, and a white man. And so we asked the female saxophonist, she couldn't do it. We asked the second female saxophonist, she couldn't do it. After that, there aren't a whole lot of professional female saxophonists running around Bloomington. So do you go with a female saxophonist whose skill set may not be catered towards what the band needs? Or do you go with somebody who can really play the music and is conscientious but may not be that demographic? And we went with the second option. We ran through some of the people who we had originally wanting to get
Yeah.
for this project, and demographically there just weren't other people standing in line, with the same skill set.
And I wouldn't have been comfortable putting somebody in a situation where they wouldn't sound really great, but they fit the demographic, and then people would start talking about that, going, you don't have the job because such and such. That's a really uncomfortable position to put in.
It's also important to set examples, of how to positively interact with society as a white male or whatever your demographic may be. And so that can still be a very positive thing.
I was thinking about this the other day because there's a lot of people who look like me are like, oh, there's a problem. I would like to help. I'm helping. I'm going to do the things that I see. I'm going to do the things that I see other people doing to help the thing out. But the thing is, you wind up looking a lot like people who have hurt them in the past, and so that action is taken as like, oh my God, it's happening. No, that's never. And so you have to learn how to work around how people who look like you have basically ruined your image.
So yeah, hopefully this will be a positive example from someone of any demographic.
What is the role of a musician in the modern world?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to know, as current musicians of the day, where we came from. Tradition, and then come out with something that's just like, wow, I've never heard that before in my entire life, and it's so much cooler because it's coming from something that's so natural.
Do you think jazz is important, and why not?
The national idiom of a country is very important, so it took a while for people to find one here. And jazz became the genre or the music, the kind of music that people define as a national idiom. And it's just a representation of, there is of course the influence of the European culture in the Afro-American culture, and this is something that happens in other countries too, That's not just in the US. The mix between the rhythmic from Africa and a couple instruments from Europe are gonna change the way that people think about music.
What is the role of a musician in the modern world?
At the most basic level, interaction. It's people. You can use music to entertain. You can use it to educate. You can use music to say, "Hey, I love you," and just as easily say, "Hey, I just really don't like you, man." And I don't know. I feel like something really, really great about that.
Do you think music has power to influence social change, and can you name a personally meaningful moment when you witness music affecting social change?
For me, a personally meaningful moment when I witness music affect social change, most of my life I grew up on the other side of the tracks where black people lived here and white people lived there. And I'm not going to say that, I won't say that prejudice went one way. It definitely was both ways. The blacks where I lived didn't want to necessarily mingle with the white people either. It was a mutual feeling, a mutual tension. And to me, whenever I was in high school and a friend of mine asked me to join this band that he was taking a part of, and I was really hesitant, but that first performance that we had was just really profound to me, to see actual mixed people dancing, no matter where you're from. I saw Hispanics, blacks, whites, Asians, and that was the first time I ever seen anything like that. And I thought that was super cool. And to me, it really showed that music transcends the people who make it. It's so much more profound, and it speaks to something so much deeper than what's on the skin, what's on the outside.
From the start, we wanted to make it clear to the members of the band that this was a collective and that there was collective authority and that the decisions regarding the music would be made with a democratic process. And, Matt and I may have decided, what chord changes go in what measure, but we really tried to create a space in which people could bring their own ideas and their own interpretations. And so during the rehearsals, people did give quite a bit of input of, I think we should rehearse this more, or I think this needs to be louder, or I think we should try moving this section.
The thing that always gets me about Duke Ellington's writing, is that he's writing for a person, and that's why it sounds so good. He's not just like, your changes, whoever sounds good should do. And so there's a lot of me being like, Sean Weber would sound so good on a shuffle. It would be nuts. Let's stick him in there. And there's other moments of like, I really think that Joel Tucker would sound really nice here, doing like a Bill Frisell thing. I really think that, and so writing for those people. And then when it came time to put it in front of them, I think Sam Motter actually said a thing. It might not have been in a rehearsal. It might have been in, like, just in passing. He's like, so you want us to sound like the most like ourselves, right? I'm like, yeah, there's not really another option for you. You don't get to sound like somebody else, Sam. Today is the day you sound like Sam Motter.
Even though Matt and I have been the composers for a lot of the music, it's really these people speaking. It's their voices through the music, which makes me feel so proud and, again, so humbled.
How do you feel about this project?
I feel really good about it. I'm really happy to be involved with it. It's definitely some of the most thought-provoking and meaningful music I've had the chance to play. It's all original, which is really cool. I really admire Hannah and Matt's ambition in going through this and doing the writing and putting the band together, and they're being really professional and just great about it in every way. So yeah, it's been really cool to be a part of.
I'm kind of used to being really the only female in pretty much any group I've been in. So a lot of times I don't really notice it until it's pointed out to me,
Sure.
like now. But I don't have anything against being one of the only women in a group. I do wish more women were involved, and I hope that, groups like this and things like this would inspire more young women to kind of look to be in something like this later in the future and to get involved in music.
We brought in some really cool players, guys that I haven't seen in a long time, like Duran and Joel Tucker. There's some very good cats on this album, and the studio cat, Tribbles.
It's unusual to have a big band of 14 people these days because they're so damn expensive. And we are learning that. But we have gotten a lot of financial support from grants from Bloomington. So there's definitely support for this kind of project. But it is unusual to see a group of this many people. But I think we are more powerful because we are a collective. We had a whirlwind schedule for the album. We only had a week of rehearsals before we went into the studio. So we made an entire full-length big band album in 1 week. And everyone was really bringing their A game. It was truly humbling to work with musicians who were capable of doing that. The 5 days of rehearsals, live show, and then 2 days in the studio, and that was it. I think it worked better to do it short and intense. I think if we had spread it out over 6 months, the music would have lost its power.
rehearsals start today.
Rehearsals start half hour.
About a half hour.
Do you have any expectations for this first day of rehearsal? What are you kind of hoping for, concerns?
Change America. No.
I'm definitely nervous. I got some jitters. The project is hugely ambitious. I mean, 10 tunes in a week, and these are not easy tunes. These are, not really tunes. They're compositions. And I'm secure in knowing that everyone is going to learn their parts. I'm not nervous about that. What I'm a little bit nervous about is, do we have enough time to really gel and sound like a band and bring the spiritual and conscientious component to it that we really want behind this music?
Well, I think some of that would help that is that a lot of these guys play good.
Right, and I think everyone really believes in the messages and things like that. We'll be spending quite a bit of time with each other in that interpersonal dynamic.
It doesn't hurt that like the band's hysterical.
Yeah.
That'll help out.
Yeah.
That'll help out.
Humor will get us through the week.
That and tons of pizza.
I'm hoping that there's going to be good communication in the band. Like Matt was saying, getting the music off the page, the eye contact, the cues, the adapting musically to each other. When you first start with a dance partner, you have to get to learn their body language and things like that. And I feel like musically we have to do that as a band. And my hope for today is that we make significant progress towards that.
Yeah. I hope that everyone brings the same enthusiasm that they showed in the interviews to rehearsal. Because if everybody remains that excited, remains that engaged, this is going to be the easiest thing I can imagine. Just like, yeah. How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing all right.
That's good to hear.
Hey, calm down.
rehearsals went really, really smoothly, and we got a lot of good feedback about the compositions. I think Matt and I were really nervous that we would play through something and people would say, oh, this doesn't sound right, it doesn't make sense, like, this really isn't working, but everyone really gravitated towards the music immediately. and any tweaks that we made were just processing, that kind of roadmap stuff. So it was really neat to see people grab a hold of their music, really sink their teeth into it, and make it come to life.
There was also the active modification of charts in rehearsal, where someone like me or Hannah would be like, all right, what do you guys think? Like, I remember I brought in War Department, and originally War Department was just like screaming fast to backgrounds, keep screaming fast, backgrounds, keep screaming fast, backgrounds, you're done. And people like, Matt, that's the same thing 3 times, and you shouldn't do that. I'm like, well, what would you do? And people came up with the best solution. There's a large part of Anthem of the 9% that is not on the score. A very large part that was us in rehearsal being like, let's figure out a way to expand this section and make something really... And that's the most effective part of the song. And people got to choose how long their solos were, more or less. Like, there was sections that Hannah was just like, how much do you want? The person would be like 4 times through, and Hannah would be like, neat, and then count it in. We gave people the option to interact with their own storytelling abilities, and that's why the arc is so nice in everyone's solo. Felipe contributed like this trombone beatboxing technique that he developed over years, just screwing around when he's supposed to be practicing like Brahms or whatever those guys play. Because we let everyone play to their strengths, the whole thing sounds better.
Some of the broadest challenges we had were adapting ourselves to other people's concepts. Like explaining to people what you're supposed to do in War Department took a while. Like in War Department, there had to be some time like, okay, this is how you play it timbre wise, this is how you approach it when you're blowing, things like that. And then in Hannah's music, which is not like anything those guys have read ever, where it's super repetitious, where it builds on itself, where it's layered, where you're not written with anybody, that was a hard thing for some people to learn.
We got a lot of comments from the band that they really liked our directorial style and how we did complement each other, and how Matt is kind of like the band dad that gets these neat ideas and kind of goofs around and makes the band feel comfortable, but then also just has these brilliant, people kind of see him as the mad scientist of the band too, with all these musical formulas running around in his head that he lays out in these compositions. And then I'm kind of like, I'm the organized one, I'm the let's do this now, let's do that, but then I also kind of bring this more spiritual wisdom and guidance to more of the social aspects of the project. I'm so glad that people felt like we worked well as a team together.
the spoken word part of her story, you know, it's one of those things that you gotta listen to, and I think having the lyrics in front of you is important. You know, we played through it, and then when we got the programs and had actually the lyrics in front of us, reading it, it's kind of really intense. I'm not gonna give too much away, because I want you all to listen to it.
What's really special, in my opinion, there's one specific anecdote that's coming to mind. And there was a member of the band who, after our first live performance, he came up to me and said that with a lot of the things that had been happening in America and the world, he had always been saying, oh, you know, I got to get more connected to what's happening around me and society and my community. But it had always been hard to find the time or the know-how, like how do you delve into that? And he said, this project has opened something up inside of me, and now I feel like I can be so much more engaged with the issues that affect me and my community and the world. And even just one person feeling like something had changed inside of them because of this project makes me feel like we've done our job.
I feel good about it, especially after our concert yesterday. It was really cool. I hadn't heard all the pieces yet because I don't play on all of them, but some of the messages and ideas behind all of it were really cool, so I'm really excited to be a part of it.
I'm excited to get it documented and hopefully sounding good. It was a really cool concert. I think it's going to be, like, the concert was like you get to capture people in one moment and build their kind of, the energy kind of builds to the end, and you really are feeling the message by the end. And the album I think will be interesting because you can pick moments, but you could also listen to it all the way through. But it's a little different because you can pick those moments, and there's a lot more room to really hear each audio track, and it can be cleaner and stuff. So I'm excited to hear the album. I think that'll be the most realized version of the message. But the live, you gotta play it live though, because you gotta see it live. But I think the album will really help Matt and Hannah really hear everything they're going for.
How's it feel to be recording here today?
It's a little frightening. There is some room for mistakes. We can go back and take another take, but you kind of come to this realization that the final product is going to be out there forever. But it's a great group of people to work with, and it's great music, so the overall process is exciting.
Other things that were surprising were our ability actually to record everything in 2 days. We were kind of unsure about whether or not we were going to be able to pull it off, and we did. There's so much thinking and planning that goes into the recording process. All of the logistics behind it. You know, like El Viento, the song with the Latin percussion that has many different sections in it, took a half a day to record, you know, because there was just so much that went into the production. Whereas a song like Murasaki, 2 hours, in and out. It's really hard work. Really, really hard work. But it's very rewarding. It was such a privilege and an honor to work with Jake Belser. He's an absolute magician, and he's such a kind soul. And I think he was genuinely excited about the music that we were making. So he was so professional, so knowledgeable. He really made us sound good, and he was willing to work with our crazy production schedule of recording a full album in 2 days, and then all of the mixing and editing that we did. I feel like I learned so much through working with him about the recording process. And he was very good at talking about everything that he was doing and including us in the process. Jake's just a great, great guy.
How you feeling? We got the first song down?
Yeah, it's pretty good. It sounded really good. I think we did a good job. Let's move on to the next one.
How do you feel about being here with these musicians making this record?
These are all people I've looked up to for a long time, and it's kind of super great to have them on a project with me. It's cool to be in a situation of just like mutual admiration like this. Like everyone's friends, everyone wants to stick around and like crack jokes with each other. And just having a blast, really. It's really fun.
How long have you been playing that instrument, Brennan? This semester. You've been playing for 3 months?
Yeah, maybe.
That's messed up. That's not normal.
What do you think
Cool.
lunch is going to be? Oh, sorry, you're getting interviewed.
Oh, you're good.
This is a pretty big deal, man. If you could. Oh, by the way, you should. Here, you should try these.
Oh, what are they?
We have had a very unusual timeline. We started making the record in May. It's being released in August, and that's almost unheard of. That's a very, very short timeline, and I think it's a testament to all of the hard work that people have been willing to put in. We're in an unusual situation in the online, in the usual narrative of online crowdfunding, because oftentimes the successful projects are the ones that already have a big following from doing a bunch of live shows. They have fans of the band, and then they kind of set out to make an album. And we were kind of doing the opposite. And so we didn't have a lot of people who had been to shows and heard us. So I think our the main things that attracted people to donate were the social message behind the project, and then also the fact that we had some product for them to see already. We had lots of photographs, we had snippets of the album already. We were just asking them to help finish off the last post-production costs. I'm immensely grateful for the support that we have been able to garner, simply because people are excited and moved by the message. After we recorded, I actually went to Cuba for a few weeks, so production took a break for a little while.
After she got back, though, we delved right into the mixing and editing with Jake. And Jake Belzer is just incredible. All that time spent just in him was like pulling back the curtain of The Wizard of Oz, but finding that he was still a wizard all along.
There was nothing Jake couldn't do given some time and Pro Tools. Two particularly cool things that I remember are that during the drum solo in Bismillah, there's vocal samples from a performance that occurred in a cathedral, and I asked him if we could make the drums sound like they were in a cathedral too, and he said, "You bet," and pulled up literally this cathedral machine that could make a sample sound like one of a dozen cathedrals from around the world. Another super cool thing he did was for the sampling on Black and Red and Bismillah, I was drawing from two different sources, old recordings from the 1960s of Malcolm X speeches and audio that I recorded via Skype from my own computer. So very, very different sounding. I asked him if we could make the Skype recordings sound the same as the Malcolm X speeches, all with that old 1960s scratchy vibe. And 5 minutes later, you couldn't tell the difference.
So after mixing, we sent it to Kate Siefker for mastering, and she did a phenomenal job. Just prior to working with us, in fact, she had mastered the #1 world music record on iTunes, so she's the real deal. And one thing that she said that really touched us was, I got to say, this is the coolest thing I've ever worked on. I'm totally honored to be a part of it, which is really nice because Kate's been involved in some super cool stuff.
During this time, we also had to start putting together the liner notes and album art, and I had this idea that the album cover should be a new and revised version of Lady Justice, with scales and a sword, but with a pair of shades instead of a blindfold. So we got our friend Imani Ramsey as a model and our friend Jeff Brown to do the photography. And then we went to the brick wall behind the studio where we made Siglo XXI to take the pictures.
And working with Jeff and Imani was an absolute breeze. Imani was super wonderful through the whole thing, was giggling the whole time she wasn't looking totally stunning. And Jeff's cypher form and on-point professionalism really made the whole thing come together, because some of the pictures almost looked like they were painted. We got the scales from a local antique dealer, and the sword was on loan from Bloomington's medieval role-playing community. Oh, it exists, and it's super, super fun.
We took a bunch of photos for the album art, but Jeff also took some candid shots of Matt and Imani and I, so we've got some really special photos from this time. And after that, the liner notes kind of wrote themselves. All we needed to do was to write down the background and substance behind the record. What made it challenging was that I was the one doing all of the graphic design, and that's not something that I've really done before at this level. But luckily, Wayne Wallace's daughter, Cheryl Thomas, was willing to be our graphic design hotline and really gave us some good pointers to make Siglo look as professional as it sounds.
Wayne was walking us through all the steps of this time and connected us with all our promotional personnel. The people Wayne pointed us at for promotion are all at the top of their field and the height of their powers. Kate Smith and Jim Igo. We even got Neil Tester to write our press release. We knew he was good at writing because he's won a Grammy for it. The liner notes to Coltrane's Afro Blue Impressions.
I think the biggest disappointment at this time was that Child Song for an Incarcerated Parent had to be dropped from the record. I wrote it based on a hymn called Father I Adore You, and the publishing company that owns the rights to that hymn refused to give us a license for a derivative work because they objected to the fact that in the context of our song, the connotation of father was changed from meaning God to an actual parent.
Putting that tune on the record would have meant committing a felony, which means up to $500,000 in fines or up to 5 years in federal prison. The irony that the tune about incessant incarceration could have put 2 college kids in jail is not lost on us, although it might have gone over the heads of the lawyers involved.
Getting all of the production finished up in just a couple months was very difficult, but I'm so glad that we had a stellar team of helpers every step of the way. So I think what's next for LMC is to first release the album. It'll be released on August 29th, and we've got a live show. And then we've got at least 2 more live shows planned. And then our hope is to go on tour on winter break, probably just the Midwest within driving distance. We've been hooked up with some foundations that do grants, especially for groups that are hoping to go on tour. So I think that would be fantastic. We've got a number of people in some cities in the Midwest who are interested in having us come and play. And then the next goal is to follow it up with a second album. We've already got a concept in mind for the second album, which is great. And we've even started on a few of the ideas for some of the compositions. So yeah, it'll be another whirlwind year, I think. And hopefully throwing in more live performances in the tour will be very exciting. at the heart of all of this is a deep, deep love for all of humanity, but specifically people who are experiencing any kind of oppression. And love demands justice.